I understand that the word father in the dictionary is sandwiched between the word fatigue and fat head. So all of us who are fatigued fatheads, happy Father's Day. I also heard that there were a couple of students, children about 7 years of age, 2 children, were leaving Sunday school, and they were talking very seriously about the message in the Sunday school. And one said to the other, "Do you really believe in the devil?" And the other one said, I really think it's kind of like Santa Claus. It's really your dad. On a more serious note, we're still reeling from the events that took place last Wednesday night in South Carolina, where a crazed young man, a racist young man, entered into a church asking to see the pastor. He was invited to sit down at the Bible study. He later said that the people were so friendly and treated him so nice that he almost didn't do what he was going to do, but he went ahead and did it. And he took out the gun, and 9 people died and others were injured. It's amazing how many of the families spoke up on television and said, as Christians, we have forgiven him and we're praying for him. What a testimony to the whole world about God's love and God's people, isn't it? And I was very moved when I heard another story that happened there. Apparently, there was a woman, 87 years of age, and her name was Susie. And she had a nephew who was in that crowd. And when the young man pointed his gun directly at the 87-year-old aunt, the young man said, "Point the gun at me." And he said, "It doesn't really matter, I'm going to shoot you all." And then he dove in front of his aunt and literally took a bullet for her. Sadly, they both died. But what a courageous Christian, willing to sacrifice his own life to save a family member. Well, I wonder what I would do or you would do if that happened to me. And I don't honestly know, because we would only have to be in that situation, and I hope that none of us really are. But I think that split-second decision that was made in a heartbeat came out of the fact that for all of his life, since he was young, he knew the value of family. So it was already there, and that moment just triggered what he already believed in and the values that he had. As I'm getting older and older, I talk about that a lot, don't I? But I'm not really that old. But I'm older than some of you on this side. I reflect on my life, and I really believe more in my life now than ever before the absolute imperative value of family. When you're young and you have new kids and you're worried so much about changing diapers and crying in bed and trying to get them to go to sleep, you don't really realize then until they grow up and become teens and they fly the coop. And then you look back and see how valuable they are. In fact, I think that other than God, family is the most important thing in my life, because when I'm gone, that's all that will be left of me. We heard some great testimonies about dads, didn't we? And I didn't ask you to do a eulogy, but I think it's always good to hear a eulogy while you're still alive. But I've been to so many funerals. And I love it when they have slides of the person's whole life. And I love it when somebody gets up and shares stories about their life. And you know what? In most cases, they never mention, or at least rarely mention, the person's employment, their job. The thing that mattered most to the people in the audience is the family and memories and pictures of times together. Now, I'm not going to preach a sermon as such. I'm just going to reflect, in a way, from my own life, some of the things that I'm still learning about being a dad for the second time. I'm still learning because I've got a lot to learn. I won't learn it all till I get there in heaven. And I'm learning it for the second time, not because I only have 2 kids. I have 3 kids, but I also have 3 grandchildren and another one on the way. And so I'm learning still for the second time. And I just want to share with you some of the things that have become important to me and some of the things that I'm challenged with in my own life. And the first one, and I'm speaking to the men particularly, but girls, you can overhear this conversation. I'm speaking to the young men who are not married, but someday may be, and the young families with new kids, and some of you who are grandparents or have older kids. I'm going to speak to you as men to men, face to face, heart to heart. And I want to tell you that one of the things I'm learning is that our kids need certain gifts. We think about Father's Day gifts that are for us. But I think that we have a lot of gifts to give our kids. And the first gift is that of unconditional love. Love unconditional. And I think that's a magnificent gift that you can give your children no matter what age they are. And unconditional means that. No conditions. It doesn't say, I'll love you if, I'll love you when, I'll love you to the degree that you deserve. I'll love you always. I may not approve of some of the choices you make or some of the decisions you make, but I will approve of you and love you no matter what. And I think we need to show our love. My parents grew up, and maybe your parents did too, in an age, in a culture where you just didn't show affection. At least men didn't. They showed their love by their hard work and so forth. You knew that they loved you, but they wouldn't hug or so forth. My dad did more hugs than most people, but he was of that generation too. And I want you to know that we should show our people, our family, our kids, how much we love them, and we should tell them. Some dads, when the children, the girls, become adolescents, suddenly they feel a little bit awkward about hugging their teenage kids. What I want you to know, it's okay to give them a daddy hug, because if they don't get hugs from you in an appropriate way, they will find hugs someplace else, perhaps appropriate, perhaps not. Hug them. In other words, love unconditional. And the second gift, may I have a bit of water, Jonathan? My mouth is just parched today. Got a little bit of a cold. The second gift is that of acceptance. And I think it's a massive gift. And some of you have spent your whole life trying to please an unpleasable father. And the thing you want most is for them just to accept you for who you are, not for who they wanted you to be or what job they planned for you to have, but just for who you are, because you're unique and you're different from your mom or dad or brother or sister. We're all special. So just accept them for who they are. And the third thing I want to share with you is that, and this may sound a bit strange, but man, I think you should give them the gift of a gentle, kind spirit. A gentle spirit. Now, I could talk about courage, and Joshua in his book says so much about that. I could talk about the need for discipline, and yes, our kids need boundaries. And yes, our parents need to be strong, but you already know most of that, because most of us men, we kind of have that built in. I don't know if it goes back to the ancient days before agriculture and we were hunters and gatherers. Thank you, Jonathan. If it's cold, you'll have a reward in heaven. Not this time. I don't know if it goes back to that cliche caricature of when we were cavemen and we took a club and that's how we got our women. We bopped them on the head and took them by the hair. We have that kind of macho instinct in us, but what we really need today more than anything else is a gentle spirit. And what God has been teaching me over the last number of years is that quality of Christ, which is gentle. And the Spirit tells us, and the book of Isaiah tells us in chapter 40, verse 11. Speaking in prophecy about Jesus, it says, He tends His flock Like a shepherd, he gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. And here it is. He gently leads those who have young. And do you remember that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, and peace? And in that list is gentleness. They used to call us gentlemen, but we're not so gentle as we used to be. And in the book of Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Blessed are the meek, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They shall inherit the earth." Well, the word meek means gentle. And meek doesn't mean weak. It's actually a word that describes a strong horse who's under control because of the bit in his mouth. And we need to be controlled by the spirit of gentleness. And that's the kind of person that I want to be. And that's the kind of dads that we need to be. And I'm looking out, and I'm not going to tell you who, but there's one person in here that I admire because he's the most gentle soul, a man I've ever met in my whole life. And I won't embarrass him. Seriously, anger and shouting comes natural. But anger and shouting is a means of manipulation. And it's not that far from the bullying that happened in the schoolyard. If I can shout louder than you can, I win. If I can get angrier than you, I win. If I'm stronger than you, I win. Well, it works. It doesn't work very well. Because when that happens, a person gives in, they back off. They'll even apologize when they're not sorry. Even if they'll say they're wrong, even if they were in the right. And then they'll go tiptoeing around the house. But all you do is you push that person back, and that person will eventually resent you when you discipline through anger and bullying and manipulation and shouting. It's action, setting reasonable, age-appropriate boundaries. That's the difference. But not through manipulation, through anger. There's a verse in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 4, that speaks to me, especially in the last number of years. Do not provoke your children to wrath. And I like one translation that says, do not exasperate your children. And sometimes I exasperate them. Somebody's nodding their head. Don't exasperate them. We're to be encouragers. Psalm chapter 103, verse 13 says, as a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. God is comparing himself to us, not the other way around. He says, as a dad shows compassion, the Lord has compassion. We are to show gentleness and kindness. And then the fourth thing I want to say, and I believe this very importantly, is we need to give them the gift of time well spent. And that's a colossal gift. And I know people say, well, I don't have time, but I give them quality time and not quantity time. I think it's nonsense. We need to have both. And quality time is not just sitting side by side on a couch looking at a television set and not talking to each other. But I was very blessed as a boy because we spent quality time and quantity time. And my brother and I, we would just look forward to the summer when we would go on road trips, once from London, Ontario, all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. We'd never seen an ocean. We ran towards it and put our feet in the sea and tasted that salty brine. And then the next year we went all the way out to Vancouver Island. And then every summer, most summers, we would go up to the north, we called it, northern Ontario, filled with lakes, so clean that you could swim and open your mouth and drink at the same time. And so many times we would camp under the stars and have a great bonfire and watch the sparks go up and mingle, or so it looked, with the stars above. We had quality and we had quantity time. And I believe that's what God wants us to do with our children. There's a song I was listening to on the radio this week, and it comes on every Father's Day week. And you probably know the words. The cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when, but we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. And it's a ballad, and I won't quote all the verses, but it goes through about a dad who just doesn't have time for his kid. One verse says, my child arrived just the other day. He came into the world the usual way. But there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. And he was talking before I knew it. And as he grew, he said, I'm going to be like you, Dad. I'm going to be just like you. And then the next verse says, my son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, Dad. Let's come and play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today. I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay. And he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. And he said, I'm going to be like him. Yeah, you know I'm going to be like him. And then the last verse is very cutting. The father says, I've long since retired. My son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, but I can't find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It'd be sure nice talking to you. And then he says, as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. And if that's your story about your dad, you know the sorrow and the pain. But if you're a dad, make a decision to give them quality and quantity time. And for you, those of you who are older, if you've not already made that decision, it's never too late. Well, the next thing that flows out of that thought is the gift of memories, and that's a momentous gift. I don't know how good your memory is. I can't find my glasses and my keys, but I can remember things that happened when I was 3 years old. I'm not kidding. I can remember Dad taking me on his shoulders. I can remember all the fun things we did. And I encourage you to create, to make memories that will outlast your life so that 30 years from now, your children will still be able to warm themselves at the afterglow and cherish life because of the memories you've given them. Well, the next thing I want to encourage you to do, and I'm reflecting on my own life as well as reading Scripture, is make a decision to have spiritual conversations. Talk to them about the Lord. In some families, there are two words that are never spoken out loud. One is the word sex. The only time you mention it is during the talk. And some parents are afraid to say the talk. I never did have the talk. And then the other word that's never mentioned in many homes, even Christian homes, is the word Jesus. But listen to what Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 to 8 says. These commandments that I give to you today are to be on your heart. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit down at home, when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. And then there's a beautiful verse, or set of verses in Psalm chapter 78, verses 5 to 7 that we may not think of often. It says, He established a testimony in Jacob, and He appointed a law in Israel, which commands our fathers to teach their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of the Lord, but keep his commandments. Their kids who aren't yet born, and they share with their kids, and that's how the gospel came down to us. Because, in every generation, Christianity is only one generation from extinction. But all through history, parents have spread their faith to their family and their family and their family. Have the courage to open up a conversation while you're in the car, while you're having dinner. Just talk about the Lord and don't be afraid to do that. And then the last thing I want to share with you is the most important gift, the greatest gift, and that's Jesus. There's a beautiful verse in the third book of John, the third letter of John, chapter 1, verse 4. He's speaking as a pastor, as a shepherd, and he calls his congregation children, my children. I like that. And he says this, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Isn't that beautiful? And he's not only saying that, but he's saying it inspired by God. He's saying that on behalf of God. God says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. The thing that breaks a dad's heart more than anything in the whole world is when they might turn away from God. And it breaks God's heart. And adults, men and women, the best gift you can give them is the gift of Jesus. There's a picture I'd like to show you. And this is not the original picture of one that I'm going to talk about. A friend gave me a gift of a photograph like this, but that's not it. And it was one of their dear friends. And they're in the middle of this game called, well, I don't know that it has a game, Throw Me Higher, Dad. And you've all played this game. And parents, you've all played this game. And if you haven't, you've failed. You should all do this game, that you won't break them. And you throw them up a little bit, and they start to squeal with joy. And they say, higher, Daddy, higher. And you throw them up a little bit higher. Higher, Daddy, higher, Daddy. And you throw them up. And there's a photograph that my friend gave me of their friend, a young man. His T-shirt was blue. There's a background of green because there's bushes and trees behind. And the little boy is wearing a white T-shirt, if I remember correctly. I couldn't find it, although I looked. And he's not just lifting him up a few inches like that, but there's a full 1.5 feet at least between the boy and the dad. And it's such a wonderful picture because the boy is just spread eagle like that with his arms and legs splayed, and he's just crying with laughter. And you can't see the back you can only see the back of the man. You can only guess, but from the high-raised cheekbones, and you see from behind, you can guess that he's just smiling with delight. But the significance of this picture is that there's something that the dad knows that the child doesn't know. And to the first-time looker at this picture, onlooker of this picture, there's something in the picture that you don't know. But I'm going to tell you what it is. Again, it's not that picture, but it's like that. Child has a terminal illness. And it's not that much later that the child dies. But here is this beautiful snapshot. A beautiful metaphor. As there is a dad, and there's a child, and there's a 1.5 feet between them. And I think it's symbolic of the fact that this man who has prayed, this Christian who has prayed for his child, is giving his child to God, and there are the invisible hands, the arms of God. That's what it speaks to me about. And I'm sure he lifted that child to God all the time when he prayed. And I challenge you, men, to lift your children and your grandchildren to God. Lift them in your prayers. Lift them by talking to them along the way. Lift them by creating memories. Lift them by accepting them. Lift them by giving them love unconditional. And dads, then you become like the face of Jesus. And then they can pray, Our Father which art in heaven. And it has meaning. Thanks be to God. Let's pray.